Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, March 12th, 2025, and our friend Graham Fuller is back with us. Welcome back, Graham.
Thank you, Nima.
Let's get started with the negotiations between the United States and Ukrainians. They're talking about a possible 30-day ceasefire. And and here is what Marco Rubio said about it.
Paul. Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. I want to personally thank, we both want to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty, for hosting us, for making this possible. They've been instrumental in this process, and we're very grateful to them for hosting us here today. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball's now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is, number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Yeah, he said the ball is now in their court, in the Russia's court. And here is Emmanuel Macron reiterating what Rubio said, that the ball is now clearly in Russia's court. And he said that I welcome the progress made during the discussion between the United States of America and Ukraine. And he says France and its partners remain committed to a solid and lasting peace, supported by a robust security guarantee for Ukraine. Graham, in June 2024, Vladimir Putin pointed out that to go after any sort of ceasefire with Ukraine, we need two preconditions. One of them is to Ukraine withdraw all their forces from Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, in Kherson. And the second precondition was to just declaring that they're not officially seeking any sort of membership into NATO. Here are two preconditions on the part of Russians. How do you see the Russian sort of response to this new attitude on the part of the Trump administration?
Well, I think the question of NATO membership for Ukraine is non-negotiable from the Russian perspective. That indeed, as you know, was the cause of this entire war. We would have no war today if NATO and the United States had not insisted on pushing the boundaries of NATO right up to the borders of Russia. So that is non-negotiable. Russia will not change in that regard. But in terms of territory, I think that is a very vague and movable situation, and very much open to negotiation and bargaining. The borders, where the Russian army is today, is different than it was 2 weeks ago. And if the fighting continues, Ukraine will continue to lose even more territory. But I think these elements are negotiable. And obviously, Russia wants to be in as strong a position in terms of territory as it can be in going into those negotiations. But I don't think the territories matter that much.
Yeah. Emmanuel Macron is talking about a lasting peace and security guarantee to Ukraine. What would be that solution in your opinion? Is that the solution that is that the situation that we're witnessing in Austria, neutrality, Ukraine being neutral forever? That would make a huge sort of position for Ukraine that brings some sort of condition, some sort of security guarantee for Ukraine.
I think there is no alternative to a neutral Ukraine, as we said a moment earlier. This issue was the cause of this entire conflict. So I think we will not see any negotiation over that issue. But the broader question of Ukrainian security really in part lies in its neutrality. Austria has done very well and very peacefully since it has been a neutral force. Neutrality is a time-honored tradition in international politics, and it is generally honored by most states. I understand why Ukraine might want to have U.S. military forever in Ukraine. I mean, if you ask the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, would you like to have an American presence there forever? Of course they would say yes, because they live next to the Russian bear. That is a very uncomfortable situation for them and for Ukraine. But that sadly is the reality of geography over time. So I don't think there can be any better guarantee for Ukraine other than Russia accepting this neutrality, and everyone will agree not to interfere in it. Europe, I think, still would very much like to have some kind of peacekeeping or witnessing or something like that. That's not in the cards. I think Russia wants an absolutely neutral thing with no particular political or military association with Ukraine. Economic, yes, that's fine. Russia has no problem with Ukraine joining the EU. That should be very satisfying, I think, to Ukraine in many respects. But it is not and never will be a military guarantee.
I think that Donald Trump and his administration is trying to build a common ground for the United States and Russia to work on, to find some sort of common interest. Here is what Lavrov was talking about in terms of how they can approach each other, the United States and Russia.
We want normal relations. Then they said, look, we want normal relations. Normal relations in the sense that the foundation of the American foreign policy under the Trump administration is national interest of the United States. This is absolute and without any discussion. But at the same time, we understand that other countries also have their national interests. Right. And those countries who have their national interests and don't play into the hands of somebody else's interest, right, we are ready to have serious discussion. It is very well understood, they told us, that countries like the United States and Russia would never have their national interest the same. They would not coincide maybe even 50 or less percent. But when they do coincide, this situation, if we are responsible politicians, must be used to develop this simultaneous and similar interest into something practical which would be mutually beneficial, be it economic projects, infrastructural projects, something else. And then another message went, but when the interests do not coincide and contradict each other, again, this is then the responsible countries must do everything not to allow this contradiction to degenerate into confrontation, especially military confrontation, which would be disastrous for many other countries.
Right.
Yeah. The way that he's picturing this common ground between the United States and Russia would be based on the national interest of these two countries. Do you think that is achievable? By the way, he's brutally honest when he's talking about the relationship between Russia and the United States and the future of this sort of relationship. But when it comes to building a common ground and the way that he's pointing out, what's your take on that?
Well, first of all, I would have to point out that I think Sergei Lavrov, is probably one of the finest foreign ministers who is operating in the world today. He has long experience deep diplomatic skills and an understanding of international geopolitics at a very, very high level, not matched by almost any other country in the world today. So we have to take what he says very seriously. Secondly, this is not just Lavrov or even Putin talking here. We are going back to the period of Gorbachev at the fall of the Soviet Union, at the period of the fall of the Soviet Union, when he said that he hoped that the post-Soviet period would open up a new era of peace for all of Western Europe, for all of Europe, not just the Western Europe, all of Europe. And he even used the term from the Ural Mountains in Russia all the way to Spain. In other words, this would be a comprehensive plan in which everyone's security interests were taken into account and treated accordingly. That's not an easy thing to work out, but it's certainly something that can be done. This is a very different situation than than what happened after the fall of the Soviet Union, when the Warsaw Pact collapsed and the United States then said, okay, now we are the only superpower in the world, and we have NATO to back us up in this regard. And NATO turned then into an instrument, almost it's a military instrument to press Russia, to weaken Russia, to attempt to remove Russia from the scene. So I think those days should be gone. And what Russia is still, what Lavrov is talking about here, is going back to Gorbachev's original vision of a comprehensive treaty, and that means that Europe should be comfortable, Russia should be comfortable with this new structure, and very clear rules as to how that structure will be maintained. It's complicated, but it's doable.
He's talking about Russia and the United States, but sarcastically, it seems that he's talking about the European countries as well, because we know that when Russia is talking about a common national interest, he's talking about Germany, most importantly, more than all of the countries that in the European Union, maybe United Kingdom and France. Are they really willing to go after their national interest? Do they really want to put aside this sort of hatred toward Russia, which doesn't make sense, which doesn't make them prosperous, even doesn't make the situation, the economy, the problems that their economy is facing right now in Europe. There has to be some sort of remedy for what's going on in Europe. You cannot treat the conflict in Ukraine this way without having your national interest as the first priority. How is that going? Are Europeans capable of understanding that?
Look, Nima, the European Union and the states of Western Europe have been under the US influence ever since the end of World War II and the creation of NATO. Europe has no independent foreign policy interests as a unit, except for NATO. They don't know anything else but NATO. The US pays for most of NATO. Europe can almost relax in terms of having any security problems as long as the US supports NATO and the US pays for most of what NATO. The US indeed was arguing with NATO for a long time, maybe still is, about how much the Europeans should pay for their share of NATO. Trump mentioned this repeatedly, but it's a huge paradigm shift for the European states to consider a situation for Western Europe that does not involve NATO, that is not strictly based on American military desires and American strategic desires vis-a-vis Russia or vis-a-vis China or anywhere else. That transition is going to be very, very difficult. They've grown up in this. They've been socialized into this situation for 50 years or more than 50 years, we can say, of thinking about geopolitics. Maybe with Trump's brutal blows, brutal language to Europe, they're beginning to realize that the old game is over. But I don't know, and it's going to be very painful for them to figure out how to make this transition. If there is no NATO, will there still be an EU? That's a question talked about by a number of scholars. What is the interrelationship between the EU and NATO? Does the existence of the EU and the functioning of the EU depend in part on the NATO organization? These are questions we don't know the answer to. Europe does not yet know the answer to these issues, but it does require a complete rethinking. And as you just said, Nima, why should Europe be in permanent hostility to Russia, except for two reasons? One, this is a long, excuse me, a long European tradition that was essentially promoted by the British for centuries as the Russian being the great enemy of the British Empire, and the British feared that the great Russian state would come down across Central Asia and seize and capture the British Empire in India. Well, so that this fear goes way back. And I think now Europe has to reconsider all those questions. And the other reason, of course, is that the U.S. has promoted this idea constantly, year in, year out, of the Russian threat. This is how U.S. foreign policy operates, essentially, is trying to identify threats somewhere in the world and to then organize alliances against that state, that new enemy that it has chosen. It could be Russia, it could be China, it could be Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, for sure, other states. But I think once you decide, once that game of find the enemy is forgotten, then you can maybe rethink the questions. Why should indeed we have to have conflict with Russia? All states have minor frictions, and human beings have minor frictions in their life, but that doesn't mean you hate them. It doesn't mean you go to war with them. They're negotiable in most cases. Maybe some complicated, some not, but it's certainly doable. But I think Europe needs to get into this new, out of the old mindset and into the new one. And I don't see a single leader in Europe ready to make that transition, except for Viktor Orban in Hungary and possibly Pico in Slovakia.
And you've mentioned the roots of the hatred toward Russia going back to the British Empire. I was always fascinated the way that there is the way that the CIA and MI6 are communicating with each other, because we know that if you remember, when Zelensky was negotiating with Putin in the late March and in 2022, when they started talking to each other to find a solution, and they reached an agreement actually, but later on we had Boris Johnson going to Ukraine and sabotaging the whole thing. I was always fascinated why Boris Johnson was there. Why not someone else? Why not Macron? Why not Olaf Scholz? Who are these people in the United Kingdom? What is the connection between the United Kingdom and Zelensky as the president of Ukraine? Zelensky went to England, and he went to the MI6 headquarters and talk. You don't go as a president of a country, you don't talk with the head of MI6. You go and talk with the president, with the prime minister of that country. And these are ties between the United Kingdom and Zelensky as the president of Ukraine. And right now, Russia is interested in removing Zelensky before finding a solution for Ukraine. How do you see the role of British government in the whole situation and the way that Russia is pointing out that with Zelensky there is no agreement?
After the collapse of the British Empire, we might say, Britain has had aspirations to be a global leader in some respects, and has decided to attach itself to the United States. Some people earlier on described Tony Blair as Washington's lapdog, that he would do whatever Washington wanted. There is some truth to this. I mean, Britain relives its glory of the global empire in the sense through the glory of the American global empire. And they don't want to give that up. They still want to be a major player. And I think Britain would be very uncomfortable in allowing Macron to become somehow the new source of support for the United States or taking the lead in European foreign policy. My interpretation when Boris Johnson went to Istanbul to kill that deal that was underway, that negotiation was underway between Ukraine and Russia, I think he probably went there with the blessings almost surely with the blessings of Washington. He may even have been asked by Washington to go there and do it, or they certainly shared a common goal. Maybe what Washington wanted to shift some of the blame for this onto Britain. I don't know. I don't know what the rationale was, but certainly there are no fundamental ties, historic ties between Ukraine and Britain. So I see Britain essentially just trying to maintain its position as attached to the United States, whether you call it a lapdog or a friend, or so I don't know. But Britain has not given up that role.
But you're talking about that they want their empire, their sort of empire, through the United States. But the United States they do want is not the United States under Donald Trump. Here comes the problem. And Trump's sort of US is not what the British government, the British intelligence want. And that's why I'm talking about Zelensky and the influence they're having on Zelensky. They can play Zelensky. If you just mentioning right after that discussion between Donald Trump and Zelensky in the White House, where did he go? He went to the United Kingdom. He talked with Starmer, later on with the king. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to play Zelensky against Trump and his administration? To what extent are they able to do that?
Well, yes, we saw Europe react in horror and dismay at Trump's words and at the implications of what he was doing. I think Europe came together quite strongly, with the exception of Orban and, as we mentioned, and also Slovakia, came together to try to push Trump away from that posture, to try to override his views, to overcome his views through NATO. But as we just were saying, NATO without Washington, there is no NATO fundamentally, either politically or economically or even militarily. So I don't think Europe really has any serious geopolitical power in changing the American posture. And I think they know it, but they are casting around, trying to find people to bring into the situation. They recently, even Canada was dragged into this in some way, or not dragged into it, willingly came in when Justin Trudeau went uninvited to Jeddah, the conference in Jeddah, to meet with Zelensky personally. I think he was getting maybe some revenge against Trump for Trump's tariff policies. I don't know. But in any case, Zelensky's looking anywhere he can to get to be able to maintain his position. He's not going to be able to do it. I feel sorry for him personally. He's worked very hard at trying to support Ukraine's interests, and he will be lucky if he gets out of office and can go to some peaceful, happy country to live the rest of his life in peace. But yes, Europe is continuing to fight this until they realize that they cannot succeed in this particular effort. And I think Trump is quite blunt in saying, basically, we're not interested, Europe, in what you think on this issue. We are the ones who are to decide. It's our power, it's our money, it's our weapons, it's our NATO. So yes, we'll listen. We'll happily hear your views, but we're the ones that are going to decide. In the end, we don't need a bunch of 20 diplomats sitting around the table when all it takes is 2 or 3.
What makes Donald Trump so difficult to understand is the way that he's talking about the issue and the way that he's acting on the issue. The way that he was talking, if you remember, Keith Kellogg was his envoy to Ukraine. He talked with Ukrainian. He said again that Keith Kellogg would be in charge of Ukraine. Right now, with the first round of negotiation, you see no sign of Keith Kellogg being part of that.
Right. Yeah, I know
what's going on.
I noticed that too, and I think here, I don't know whether this is simply normal chaos that surrounds Trump in some ways, or whether it's calculated chaos, maybe a little bit of each. But clearly, he is maybe playing off these various foreign policy activists. So Kellogg has gone there and has been the chief voice for a while. And then Rubio, who is the Secretary of State, and in theory should be doing all of these actions. And then we have Witkoff going to Russia and carrying out negotiations as well. Who is in charge of this? I don't know. Maybe Trump knows who he's doing and pulling the various strings and keeping all these people off balance. If I were Marco Rubio, I would be a little bit unhappy, because I'm supposed to be the Secretary of State in charge of foreign policy, and you've got 2 or 3 other guys out there conducting serious foreign policy with the president's blessing. So I'm sure that there must be some degree of tension. And maybe it's deliberate, or Trump is trying to see which one works, which guy handles the problems the best. We'll see. It's quite a game to watch.
By the way, you don't see Marco Rubio that much confident when he's talking. You see Mike Waltz, when he's talking, he's so confident, he knows what he's talking about. But Rubio is so much, you don't understand what's going on with him. Even in the same clip that I played for you, when it comes to Mike Waltz, when he's talking, Rubio is just playing with his suit. I don't know, he's trying to find something, and you don't see the level of rigidity, the level of the way that you see in Lavrov. You don't see that he has a rigid idea. He has some sort of strategic talk that to deliver to you. He somehow, you find a lot of doubts in the way that he's talking.
Yeah, Nima, I wouldn't call it, I forget the word you just used, rigid. I would describe it in Rubio's case more as diplomat speak. Diplomats have a way of saying things without saying anything, or obscuring some of these issues. So in this sense, I mean, Rubio, maybe it's just his own personal temperament, is inclined to talk more softly and to talk more in generalities and to avoid confrontational words. But this is also part of an American built-in contradiction, if you will, a built-in tension into American foreign policy with having a foreign minister or a secretary of state on the one hand, and then having a national security advisor on the other, and then perhaps having even some of these intelligence chiefs like Tulsi Gabbard or the CIA chief maybe even involved as well. So there is that built-in tension. I think Trump is pressing on all keys of an organ, if you will, to see which one makes the piano, to see which one makes the best sound, which one works most effectively.
When I talk about Rubio, I know that I'm not just attacking him. I'm just saying that it seems that he doesn't know what's the agenda, what they're doing, what would be the main goal. They're just talking and talking to find, I don't know, new opportunities, new fields that they can build on, that they can make a foundation for talks. But it seems so much inconfident that could show us that they don't know the result of these talks. Are we getting that sort of sense from them?
I think Trump is a little more in control than that. I don't know what the marching orders were for Rubio. Obviously, as we just said, there are 3 or 4 guys out there all working this problem, different aspects. So I don't know what Trump told Rubio to do. Maybe he said, go there and be nice and be friendly and find some easy agreement that we can make. And then if there's problems, then they bring in Witkoff, who's a tougher guy and will curse and yell at the Russians, or I don't know. But as I say, Trump, I think, is playing this game, this organ or something, trying to find the right combination of personalities and issues and the strengths and weaknesses. There are moments when you want a guy like Witkoff who goes in and shouts and curses at people like he did with Netanyahu. You remember that incident when Witkoff was sent to Israel to tell Netanyahu to sign the ceasefire, and Netanyahu said, okay, but not today because it's our holy day, it's Shabbat. And Witkoff said, I don't give a shit about your Shabbat. I'm coming and we're going to sign an agreement. That was his words. So that's his style. That he may be exactly the right kind of guy to send in at a certain moment, maybe to hit Lavrov or hit Trump, to hit Putin over the head with a hammer, and another time to send Rubio, who will be a nice guy and very accommodating and saving everyone's face. That's just my sense of how Trump is using these various weapons and tools at his command.
And when we know that Russia and the United States, at least what was so amazing about the case of Syria, they both agreed on that they need to talk about Syria at the Security Council, a meeting of Security Council at the UN. And what is the situation, Graham, in Syria that made the two countries concerned about the situation? How is there any sort of common ground for the two countries to work on?
But between Israel and
the United States and Russia, both countries on March 10th.
Yeah. Russia has long had a significant role in Syria. It's had a military role. It's had a naval base in Latakia for, I don't know, 30, 40 years at least. There's been a Russian naval base there. They've had ties with the regime in Syria, with the Assad family going way back. So right now, as you know, there is a considerable disorder and chaos in Syria as the Syrian regime now seems to be trying to crush any former opposition groups or alternative groups of power, especially among religious groups. The old Alawite group, the Alawis, who were the backbone of the Assad regime. They're, of course, out, but they have had power and have a lot of significance in their position around the country. So that's still being struggled. But I think Trump very wisely, I think it was a very good idea to ask Russian cooperation and maybe work jointly on this question, because Russia does have clout. It does have experience. U.S. has had no experience with Syria. It wouldn't even talk to Syria. It has been trying to overthrow the Assad family, not just Assad's son, but Assad's father, going back 40 years, 50 years, the U.S. has been trying to overthrow them. So the U.S. does not have a very good hand to play in this game. And Russia can be very, very helpful, who is experienced, knows the game, knows the people. So to me, that was a very wise judgment, and a useful one to maybe help eventually restore some order to the country.
Is Syria going to be a source of chaos in the near future, or for a long run, I don't know how many years they're going to continue this way with the new self-appointed president, Jolani or Al-Shara, whatever is that. And Turkey, it's so amazing to me. What is right now, what is this policy of the United States? Are they fighting Turkey in Syria? Are they trying to cooperate? How do you find that?
I don't know that Washington has any clear policy, and it's difficult. There are perhaps elements of Trump's style in Erdogan's style. Every day that we see slightly different changes. Erdogan is very skillful and moving fast, visiting here, visiting there, making major pronouncements, attempting to play an important role in various regional crises, and certainly is not under any American control virtually whatsoever. I think if Trump really threatened him, as Trump likes to do sometimes, threaten people, he could maybe make Erdogan a little more nervous. But right now I see Erdogan acting very independently, maybe opportunistically, to find Turkey's own interest and to be part of a solution in Syria, because Turkey's interests are deeply involved. Damascus was at the heart, in many ways, of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Turkey, at least in the past, understood the role of Syria quite well. I wouldn't want to predict where Erdogan is going to go on this. He like Trump, he's quite unpredictable. But yeah, surely Turkey's greatest, number one security interest, as you know, is in northwest Syria, with the Kurdish ethnic group and their own sort of small state. Nobody knows what that state will be. The Kurds would like to turn it into a major Kurdish state. That's the last thing that Erdogan will allow. And that would be his number one goal in dealing with Syria. Not the only goal, but a significant goal.
Thank you so much, Graham, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always. Take care, Graham.
Good, you too.